Alrighty. I'm going to introduce this panel, and then we'll get things started. I think we're kicking off with a reading from Nicole Zelniker. The short story that she submitted for our short work series. It was riveting. Okay, here are our panelists. Nicole Zelniker is the author of several books, including Until We Fall, which was a finalist for the Forward Indie Awards and in LGBTQ+ adult fiction. Check out the rest of her work at NicoleZelniker.com or keep up with her on Instagram and Twitter at Nicole Zelniker. Gwendolyn and Nix is an editor with Aconite Books and author of the Celestial Scripts fantasy series, Sharks of the Wasteland, and the newly released dark fantasy, I Have to Be Where No Storms Come. She lives in Missoula with her husband, young son, and wild gray Labrador. And Laramie Dean, man about town, drama teacher, and playwright, and now horror author. And you will see him a lot around here.
Hi. So, Nicole, do you want to kick things off?
Is this working? Yep. Okay. I just needed a second. I'm just going to hold it. Awesome. Thank you guys all for coming. I am going to read part of the short story that I submitted for the Short Works panel. However, terrified you get during this, know that I am much more so standing up here reading to all of you. So this is called Dollhouse. Raina King's dollhouse was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen, but Sophie absolutely loved it, and Raina was 12 now and too old to play with dolls anyway. It was painted bright orange and had lilac trim. The door was navy blue with a faded, peeling brass doorknob. Sophie hugged Raina when she dropped it off and then played with it for the rest of the day, opening and closing doors and placing her dolls in different rooms. Dean had just finished dinner one night when he asked me to grab Sophie and Jonah. Where are they anyway? Jonah's reading, I said, because my 8-year-old son had gotten his English professor father's brains. Soph is probably playing with the dollhouse. That was all she ever did on the weekends after she finished her homework, and given that she was in kindergarten, she didn't have a lot of it. I knocked on Jonah's door and pushed it open. He was sitting at his desk reading Dean's worn copy of Harry Potter and fidgeting with his glasses. Just last month, he'd asked me to get a round pair so he could be more like his favorite protagonist. We were already plotting how best to hook up his wheelchair to a broomstick next Halloween, only 11 months away. Jonah had Dean's brains, but he looked like me. He had small, wide eyes and straighter hair. His skin was light brown, closer to mine. Sophie was dark and had curly hair and owl eyes like her dad. If Sophie ended up needing glasses, they would be huge. Joe, dinner, I said. He put the book down. Can I finish after dinner, he said. You already know how it ends, but I knew I would let him. I helped him get the chair out into the hallway and then went to grab Sophie. Just as I thought, she was sitting in the corner of her room in front of the house. She had a Barbie in one hand, a gift from Dean's mother for Sophie's 5th birthday last month, and a Raggedy Ann in the other. She was sitting Barbie in the dollhouse kitchen when I knocked on her door. Oh, hi, Mom. Do you want to play? It's time for dinner, I said, maybe after. Okay. She put the Raggedy Ann down on the floor and ran past me into the hall. I followed her out, taking a backwards glance at the ugly house that now occupied the corner of my daughter's room. The windows in the bedroom looked like eyes. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here. So Sophie, the daughter, keeps playing with the dollhouse. They start to hear some strange voices from it. And so now Sophie and the protagonist, Maya, are taking a walk. One of Sophie's favorite things was walking in the woods behind our house, especially in the fall. On this particular weekend, she and I zipped ourselves up in puffy jackets, hers pale black and mine blue, and went to feel the crisp November air and the leaves crunch beneath our feet while Dean went to the grocery store and Jonah did subtraction tables. Sophie stuck a still red one in her black hair and left it there, tucked between the folds of her ponytail. We walked around the outer rim of the woods up to the lake, nearly a mile away. Sophie darted off around the edge of the lake, stopping every few feet to jump on a crusted leaf. I'm not sure how long before we reached the house, but I do know Sophie saw it first. She stopped suddenly and pointed. "It looks just like my dollhouse," she said. I looked up at the building, orange with lilac trim. I couldn't see the door from the side, but the other details I could easily identify. The stub of a chimney, the 2 steps leading down from the front door, the rounded windows. "It really does," I said. "I wonder who lives there," Sophie said. "Can we find out?" "I don't want to bother the people inside," I said, although I found myself wondering too. Who on earth would paint their house that color? "We don't have to stay for a long time," Sophie said. "I just want to tell the people that this house looks like my dollhouse. Please, and then we can go home." I looked up at the house and then my daughter. "Fine, we'll make it quick." Sophie took off again, running to the front of the house and up the steps, but she stopped at the front door. It was already open, and an older woman, maybe in her late 60s, stood in the doorway. "Oh, hello," Sophie said. She put her hands behind her back, suddenly shy. I came up behind Sophie and put my hand on her shoulder. "We're sorry to bother you," I said. My daughter just got excited when she saw your house and just wanted to see if she could meet the people that live here. It looks a lot like her dollhouse." The woman's face lit up. "Oh, of course," she said. "Do you want to come in? She's welcome to look around." "That's okay," I said. "Really, I'd love visitors," the woman said. "Come on in." Sophie looked back at me with pleading eyes, and I sighed. "Thank you very much," I said, and I took Sophie's hand so we could walk inside together. I followed the host into the kitchen, where she put a red kettle on the stove and lit the fire with a match. "Does jasmine tea sound okay to you?" "That would be great," I said. "I'm Maya, by the way. We live on the other side of the lake on Hilltop Road." "Alana," she said. At the mention of the name, my mind immediately went to Francine and her sister, who had been 20 when she disappeared. They were half-sisters technically, and Francine was a lot older than Alana, who had only been 10 herself when Raina was born. She would be around 22 or 23 now, wherever she was. "Can I help you with something?" I asked. "Get the tea bags or something?" "Oh no, just sit," Alana said. "Feel free to let your family know you'll be later than expected." I stood on the stool next to the counter and fished my phone out of my pocket. "Oh, there's no service," I said. "I'll just step outside." Wham! Something heavy collided with the back of my head, and I fell forward, slamming my face against the countertop. I groaned and lifted my head, but bright lights popped in my vision, and the room tilted on its axis. Alana's shadow scurried out the kitchen door. "Wait," I gasped. Sophie ran into the kitchen, past the Alana shadow, and froze just past the doorway. I could make out the red leaf sticking out between her curls. That's all I'm going to read today, but if you would like to read the rest of it, it is in a book called 101 Proof Horror, and I will pass it along to Laramie to get the panel started.
Hello. I'm Laramie Dean, as Sam said. This is an excerpt from my first novel, which is being published by Inkshares and will be available on November 1st. If you are a Missoulian and you are interested in coming to the book party, it will be at Frame of Mind, which Sam spoke eloquently about. I'm very excited. Black Forest is the name of the book. It is about Nathan, who is about to begin his first year at college at Waxman University. Nathan is 18 and queer and has the disconcerting habit of seeing dead people occasionally, not very nice looking dead people, falling apart, gross dead people. This excerpt is from around the middle of the book. He is enjoying college. The dead people seem to have disappeared. But students at the university are also going missing. Boys from the university are going missing. Leaves fell and flew everywhere, flaming on the trees and then collecting in brown piles all along the sidewalks that crisscrossed campus. Nathan enjoyed kicking through them as he walked, enjoyed the crunching of their little bodies beneath his sneakers, enjoyed picking them up sometimes and crumbling them into dust in his fingers, so that the wind could take it in a swirl and carry it away into nothingness. The day after the disaster in Keith's room at the palace, Nathan, knowing it was hopeless, left a voicemail for Keith. "You should call me back so we can talk. I think we should talk so we're all on the same page. Come on, man, please." After he hung up, he closed his eyes and touched a hand to his forehead, knowing that every word had been meaningless. He went for a walk after leaving the useless message. With most of the sidewalks deserted, he froze, balking at the sudden appearance of two boys standing directly in his path. They hadn't been there a second before, he was sure of it. Then he recognized them from the newspaper. Piper Collins, in the senior photo they'd taken from his high school yearbook, had grinned sunnily, eyes sparkling, while in his picture, Will Prettyweasel only glared out at the world, his mouth small but ferocious, as if to say, "Fuck with me. Go on and do it, sons of bitches. Fuck with me, I dare you." Now they were faded, their faces washed out, completely leached of color, and their eyes held no luster. People passing by stepped around them without looking at their faces, and even though neither boy cast a shadow on the sidewalk, the leaves stirred nonetheless in the movement of their wake as they came relentlessly forward. "It's me," Nathan thought, frozen. Just like the mermaid woman said, "They're here because of me." But these things, or boys, were they boys still? Were different than the ones that had come before. Nathan didn't know what it meant. He didn't know what they would do. He covered his mouth with his hands to smother any screams that might escape. He tried to run, but they were just behind him, and now they were three. For Adam Harris, as terrifying as he'd been when Nathan last set eyes on him in the woods, had joined them. All three of their faces were covered in fine, thin dust, and this dust was laid over with spider webs. Will Prettyweasel's black, glossless hair was decorated with 4 dead leaves. But even as he watched, the skin of Adam Harris's face twitched and bubbled, as if something beneath it pressed up. Will Prettyweasel's furious, betrayed features shifted and bulged. Piper Collins grinned humorlessly, the bared teeth of a predator, and his lower jaw gaped, stretched, and Nathan cried out at the angry, swirling darkness he saw there deep in his gullet. A hand danced its way from the center of Adam Harris's forehead, fully formed, the fingernails ragged and torn and stained with earth, and it clutched in Nathan's direction. The multi-jointed leg of a spider, covered with fine, pulsating hairs, burst from Will Prettyweasel's right eye socket. The eye sprayed out in clots of jelly, while the spider's leg pawed furiously at the air. All three boy things whined eagerly, a dissonant, frighteningly canine sound that grew louder and higher. Nathan turned, tripping to run. They reached for him. His legs tried to move, to poise him into forward motion. Then they were upon him. Hands, so many hands, and cold, their faces eager, writhing over him, one of us. Darkness all around him, and the thick stink of their rotting skin and the green-gray and moldy meat beneath it. It swelled up around him as they pressed ever closer to him and held him to themselves. Then, one by one, they put their mouths on him. Thank you. Do you want to know what happens next? Gotta buy Black Forest, available November 1st. You can find me at bylaramiedeen.com and bylaramiedeen on Instagram. That's you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, we're gonna start. I don't need. Yeah,
I'm so excited to have nightmares about that book.
yeah, that was terrifying.
Ready. Okay.
Okay. I was gonna do reading, but I wasn't sure. We're running out of time, so.
Oh, do we have until 2:30?
Oh, I thought we had until.
I thought we had until 3.
We have until 3. Do you want to read?
Yeah, I'll really read.
We're doing great.
Okay, I'll hold it. Okay, it'll be really short, I promise. So my book is I Have Asked to Be Where No Storms Come. And if you missed my reading, shame on you. That was yesterday, but now you get to hear me again. Just kidding. So my novel is a Weird West dark fantasy with horror elements. It's pretty much horror. And the beginning of this book is about our main character, Domino. He is a witch in hell. Hell is a transformative place that can change and has things and people from all types of eras. So this is kind of when your first introduction to hell. Domino learned he had to be adaptable. He may have died sometime in the 20th century, but the world still spun on above. Newfangled ideas, technology, and culture leaked into hell's subterranean world. He'd noticed it before. The women sporting blue jeans, the short leather jackets, the abandoned picket signs with painted mantras calling to burn the bra alongside frack the bloody. But it didn't truly hit him until he found a contained black box of glass. Something from the bright side, the east side. Nothing so fancy could be found on the west, on this side of the dark and bloody, no matter how much time had passed. That was the problem with adaptability. If you didn't do it, refused to do it, you ended up stranded in your own time, locked in a whirlwind of denial because life had moved on without you and you weren't ready to be forgotten. It fractured his heart when he found people like that, like the young thing before him, sitting cross-legged in the desert with her fleshless fingers curled in boned zen. His throat cracked as he called out to her, too long silent on this never-ending world. His long, bleached hair spread across his face, blistered and peeling from the sun. He snapped his fingers inches from her nose, but she didn't blink, didn't move, returned to dust. He eyed her ripped jeans, her canvas tennis shoes worn through the soles, and the square black metal brick balanced on her bent knee. He took it, steadily working through the mechanics of a touchscreen. Hellish burble cooed through the earpiece, but he ignored it. This was damnation, after all. What did you expect? This was how you survived, stealing, hijacking, fast-talking, just to get what you needed. His face remained passive as applications opened brightly colored hieroglyphic bubbles. He sat, hoping this wasn't a laid trap, and mimicked her crossed legs. Their kneecaps brushed. It might have been minutes or a whole year that he sat next to her, figuring out this black box. Time had conditioned him to approach things with a childish glee, instead of like a frustrated fogey. Puzzles kept him sane, taught him to accept new appliances that were only science fiction pulp in his time. He tapped the glass with his fingernail and scrolled through her pictures. 3 smiling friends, a chocolate-colored puppy, and a rainbow cutting through the gray from far away. He stared at the picture until the screen blacked out. He thought about centuries of black skies full of peace, like the good book said. He thought about a horizon that wasn't red-lit with hellfire. He looked up. No rainbows here. Pocketing the device, he patted the girl gently on her shoulder and wished her well on her journey.
Nope, this always needs a little bit of time. I'll read just a very, very quick excerpt of the book I'll be talking about today, but I don't want y'all to get too sick of me, so I will keep it short. My book is dystopian fiction, which was, we were talking about this before, but really difficult when I was querying it to publishers because a lot of them have lists of genres they will accept, and dystopia is not its own genre. So it is, but it isn't. So that was real fun for me. Hannah's parents were sick with worry. They spent days on the phone with the local police who would tell them nothing. At night, Hannah heard them crying in their room. All they knew of Isla's whereabouts was what Hannah had told them, which wasn't much. The Saturday after Isla was taken, Hannah went down to the police station, but they turned her away. She kept going back. The next day, after school on Monday, and on Tuesday. On Wednesday, she met a sympathetic officer, Dex Sherman, named after the president, and he told her that Isla wasn't there. Where is she? Dex looked to the side of Hannah's face, his desk, anywhere that wasn't her eyes. There's a prison in Evanston for traitors to the state, he said. Excuse me, what? The prisoner, Isla, is accused of aiding and abetting terrorists. Hannah blinked. Isla abating terrorism? The thought was at best laughable. She glanced at Sherman until he finally met her eyes. Where in Evanston? That's all I'll read.
So kind of the uniting thing that brings us all together is we are a bit of the redheaded stepchildren of this literary festival. We write horror, science fiction, and post-apocalyptic. We're not your regular literary writers in any sort of way. But we still feel that that genre has a lot to play in the literary circles. Perhaps we are the science fiction who is projecting into the future. Maybe we're writing about things that are terrifying you and you have to come to terms with. So there's a lot. Right now we're talking about the status of the genre, so we're going to be talking about what genre is, kind of the spaces that are available into it, and what our work brings to the literary circles around us. So I'll kick it off with Laramie.
Hi. When I was presented with this panel, I thought, well, okay, why am I in the state of this genre? What genre are we talking about? What state are we talking about? I write queer horror fiction. We had a conversation last night with a gentleman about, what was the question? How do you
decide to write this genre?
Yeah, how do you decide to write the genre? And or does it just happen? And Gwen and I both were like, well, it's what we write. We just write in this genre. I grew up reading horror fiction, Stephen King primarily, and then graduated to Shirley Jackson and Peter Straub and River Siddons and all these other literary authors. But I feel as a queer man, as a gay man growing up in Montana particularly, there is a place for me in horror now that there wasn't necessarily even 10, 15 years ago. I feel like to be queer in America right now it's scary. It's more liberating and more open than it ever has been, but at the same time it's scarier. And horror is a place where you can deal with your fears. You can materialize them. They become monsters or ghosts or witches or whatever it is you want to fight, and they are deal withable. Or not, depending on the end of your story. So I have definitely found, as I've started querying and sending my writing out into the world, that there is an interest in queer and LGBTQ. What is the word? The kind of fiction, horror, sci-fi, speculative, thank you. This is why I brought my husband with me. Queer speculative fiction, yeah, supporting all of us, yeah. There's a place, there's an interest there. People want to read this, and for writers, we're able to finally tell the stories that we want to tell, that we feel comfortable telling.
I also don't think it's a coincidence that this often happens within genre fiction because it is more fantastical. You can create more and therefore create spaces in which, we as queer authors are welcome and in which queer folks have a voice that, that we want them to have. And so I think that's, I think it is less of a coincidence and more, that there's a reason that this is kind of the space where queerness is carved out in fiction.
I don't get to hold the mic. I'm not special enough. Yeah, and I think that's part of that also is there's a lot of quote unquote shame around writing genre fiction. Like someone might approach you and say, what do you write? And if you say, oh, I write horror, they might be like, oh, do you know Stephen King? There's a lot of, stigma against that. And it's very interesting to see why that is, because there's just as much compassion, empathy, beautiful writing, prose, anything that might be inside these kinds of works that there aren't in others. So for me, as an editor of science fiction, fantasy novels, as a writer of that, as a reader of that since I was young, it's always been interesting to me that says, well, why can't you connect with Tolkien? Like, what's wrong with, can't you see yourself in a Hobbit? Can't you, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of, but when you kind of approach that, people say, oh, you dream more than other people is what it feels like. Like you can see more beyond this world than I'm not putting down literary stuff by any means, but I'm just defending our genre. And so I think that also kind of brings in different types of spaces, whether the queer spaces, any other types of spaces, you have that ability to freely create a world that you want or can conquer things that you've always wanted to do in the present day, but you can't because of cultural stigmatizations or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of room and maneuverability. You can move, you can do stuff. In it, you can explore more than you ever could, I think, in a lot of other literary genres. And I think that's why there's a lot of the kind of literature that we have both all written and why it is becoming popular. I think that sci-fi fantasy has a renaissance on its hands at the moment. Like there's a lot of mainstream television coming out and that people are going, oh, there's a lot of books that are involved in this too. I want more of this. I want Marvel superheroes, but I don't want to see them in the 60s connotations. I want to see like them represented appropriately. Like I want to see She-Hulk being a woman, not just like a chick in, spandex. So I think there's a lot of really cool abilities there and a lot of cool evolving things for our genre.
Can we talk about representation?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, and no, you're fine. And right now, there's a huge, if you are on social media, you've seen the big argument that's happening about the black Ariel, the black Little Mermaid, and how people have risen up and are angry, and other people are rising up, and they are angry at the people that are racist and angry. And how there's a video that I watched of young black girls watching this trailer for the first time and seeing themselves represented for the first time, and it's so powerful. I feel that way a ton. Finally seeing, I'm tired, and I've been tired of coded characters, coded queer characters. That horror has always held a place for this, right? The universal monsters, you're supposed to root for the torch-bearing mob, and I was always like, oh, but the Bride of Frankenstein, oh, Dracula's daughter, no, don't kill her. Because I saw myself in the monster. And now I'm seeing myself and people like me in literature. And it's really important. I said I'm tired of queer coding. I just want queer.
Kind of going off of that, I'm wondering, like when I first started querying this around and found my publisher, one of the first things that they asked me was, who is this book for? And I think for me, this book is for anyone who can see themselves in those pages, that there is queerness, there is diversity. And I think it's also important just to say that we're all white or white passing authors, and there is more diversity in authors that is important and should be acknowledged in this room. But I think for me, what is most important is allowing folks who don't get to see themselves on the page that space. But if y'all wanted to talk about that at all.
I'll just keep going. Sorry, say the question again.
Who's your book for?
Who's my book for? Okay, my book. Well, the first thing, okay, I'm going to kind of go on a tangent. Bear with me. So one of the things that I find so incredible about sci-fi fantasy stuff is that you can explore, you don't just have humans, you have aliens, you have different types of genders, and that's acceptable. And like, we don't have to have this strange discourse that is like permeating our society. Like, you can create a world where, a certain type of alien race is there and present and could be your main character. You can put yourself in that. Having that ability to see yourself in those spaces and then be able to give that to somebody else. Like, I can say, hey, Laramie, you want this? Here, read this. This is what you're looking for. And that's, I think, creates a human connection that's so important, and it's a part of why literature exists, right? Like, we want to put ourselves into our books. We want to have that feeling. You want to read that sentence that just like takes your breath away, and you want to share that with your best friend or your grandma or your mom. My whole parents are here. Everyone's here. So I think that's just really important. And so when people ask like, who's your book for? Like, it isn't just for, people who love dark fantasy. It's also for, my grandmother, who has never really read dark fantasy and horror. She's so beautiful right in front. I love her so much. And it's making her give me questions that she might have never thought of before. So while I might say that, this is definitely for adult horror, people like me, it's also for people that haven't explored this type of world before or brought these new questions. And I think that's what's so cool about genre in general. Like, it just opens people's minds.
What's the question? Who's my book for?
Who's your book for?
Me. I wrote it for myself. I tell my students all the time, write the stories that you want to read, write the stories that you want to see, write the stories that you don't see yourself in. I was inspired to write Black Forest because I had started teaching high school after teaching at a university for several years, and I noticed that my students were graduating and leaving Missoula, and some of them were going far, far away, and then coming back almost immediately, and either enrolling in the University of Montana, which great, or not, and maybe not going back to college, which also great, fine. But it just seemed they came back defeated a little bit, and I was intrigued by this idea of the gap between high school graduation and college, which all of us that have done that have faced before. And what does it feel like to navigate that? Some people, I think, jump over the gap and feel pretty successful and land on their feet and go to college and yay, $90,000 of student loans. And some people fall into the gap and cling and claw their way up, and some people fall into the gap and land in the darkness and we never see them again. And I was really intrigued by that. But I think that as a gay man in college here in 1997, it was scary. I had a good time. My protagonist is not. He's the opposite of me. But I wrote for me. I wrote for people that want queer characters. I want I wrote for people that want queer horror. And I wrote for people that want a scary story. I feel like Black Forest is scary. The thought of a spider's leg popping out of some poor kid's eye doesn't freak you out. I don't know what to say to you.
Oh, okay. Here. What about inspiration? Where did you come up with your like inspiration for your book, or was there a space that you were like, this book is going to fill it that you never thought that was there?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and I always feel like I have a strange answer for it. But that when I'm writing and when I kind of conceive of ideas for books, that it kind of will start with an image or start with certain characters or a certain thing happening, a certain scene, and then just kind of go out from there. So that's what happened in this case. And then as I was conceiving of dystopia, one of the things that was very important for me was that in reading dystopia, both YA and adult, because I feel like dystopia is generally marketed as YA, but there are some really incredible adult dystopias. But one of the things that was very important to me was that I accurately represent the people that would be most affected if the government were to become totalitarian, that it wasn't just, straight white people that were rising up and fighting back, because that's not realistic. And so that's kind of where it started with this image and then kind of turned into, okay, but then how can I best represent this? Yeah.
Oh, okay, it's my turn. So
We're
my
doing great.
inspiration, I know we're doing so good. We don't have a moderator, we're just going on it. So my book, I kind of write my books based on places that I'm at. And this book has kind of been, I'm from Montana, I was born and raised here. And I always knew I was going to write a Montana book, but I didn't know when or what or how that was even going to happen. And so I kind of moved back to Montana after living in New York for a while, and was like, oh, it's time. It's speaking to me. But there is so much wrapped up in writing about your homeland, especially one that, the land we live on, the cultural appropriation that we've faced or that we've seen, and, tribal history and honoring other cultures and stuff like that. And so I had a really hard time trying to navigate those waters. I wanted to write about, my homeland, but how could I do that without doing it properly? And as one should, like understanding all the things that have happened here and acknowledging them. At the same time, I also felt very strongly that, this was my home. Like, I was from here, so I had a quote-unquote right to be here, and which was very, like, colonial in certain ways. And so kind of facing that up and being like, well, this is my homeland. And essentially it kind of came down to, this land isn't something that you end up conquering. It's something you're a steward of. And that really kind of came out in the book. So it was a lot about how do I wanted to write a story that was, dark fantasy, because that's just my jam. And then 2, I wanted to write about my homeland, but I also wanted to do it in the right way and the honorable way. And then 3, I wanted it to be, I have a love of prose, purple prose, yes, but like there are certain types of prose that I wanted just like to take your breath away. In that book, I wanted that to be this. I didn't want it to be a Stephen King, Carrie or anything like that, as much as people love that. I wanted it to be something, I know, I hate saying that, but for me, I wanted it to be beautiful and lyrical and have that kind of language that just made my breath like gasp or whatever. So that's kind of where my inspiration came from. And then again, living here, I kind of consider myself a magpie creator. I find like snippets of lore or song lyrics or stories, that you just randomly gather, and then all of a sudden you have this mountain that you've gathered over like 10 plus years. You're like, I'm gonna write a book with all these snippets involved in it. And you're like, wait, this is from like a Dutch mythology. That's from a Blackfeet mythology. You're like, wait a minute, I can't make a whole book with all this involved. So it's kind of like parsing through that and trying to figure out what the story is and what it's going to be.
Was your press helpful at all? I know we the three of us have talked a little bit about working with presses and like what that was like. So, and obviously there are writers in the audience. So if we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So for my novel, my press, I had written it and got it looked at and I did a lot of research. I called around a lot of places. I tried to make connections with, trace down where all the lore pieces I had, where they came from, because it's a lot of footwork and it's a lot of making sure that you can attribute what's happening to whatever tribe it might be, or maybe one lineage that you're looking at or trying to be inspired by. So I did a lot of the footwork myself, trying to make sure that it was, because it's a point of pride for me as an editor and an author to make sure that that's there. My publisher was great. They're actually a big horror press that's based in South Africa, and but they're fantastic. They're fantastic, and so they gave me a great editorial, but they didn't really help with the sensitivity reader. I did a lot of that on my own.
Yeah, I know for me, I worked with Jaded Ibis Press, and they were awesome. And one of the things that I will say about working with a small press versus like the big five or versus self-publishing is that you get a lot of individual time with your editor and a lot of really great feedback about how things work. The passage that I read a little bit from just now is one that my editor came back to me every single time I submitted a new draft and was like, you still need to work on this. So now I read it everywhere because I just worked so freaking hard on it. But
I didn't have to be so concerned, I think, about sensitivity or representation. I also feel really fortunate. It's my first novel, and when I received my editorial letter, I didn't know what that was. I Googled it, and it was like, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, editorial letter." It was scary. It was terrifying. I don't often handle criticism very well, which is ironic, Alanis. I was so fortunate. I had my first editor was named Sarah Nivola in LA, and she's wonderful. And she presented me with this letter that was did not make me feel like an idiot, but allowed me to go, why didn't I think of that? I teach writing. Why didn't I think of that? But that's why we have editors, and they're really necessary. But I had a really good experience. My publisher is Inkshares, and they've been great. By the time I got to copy edits 2 years later, it was pretty intense. Can I talk about Montana for a second? Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to build on what you were saying too about place and space. If there are other gay male horror writers who write about Montana out there, please get a hold of me. I want to meet you. I don't know anybody else that does this. And my whole aesthetic, if I have an aesthetic, is what I call Montana Gothic, which I grew up in northeastern Montana by a little town named Ritchie, if any of you are familiar, by Wolf Point. Some of you are nodding. I'm so sorry. In this farmhouse that is now quietly decomposing several miles in the middle of, like, when I say the middle of nowhere, that's where it is. But it's given me so much grist for my work. Oh, God. There, no. Oh, God, they're dead. I can project really well, it's okay. It's a spooky place in the middle of nowhere. What I love about Montana, because I love writing about Montana, is how it's this one space, and it's so different. The eastern part, the central part, the western part, it's almost like 3 different states.
is this working?
Oh, is it working?
Yep, I think it's working.
Okay.
We turned it on and back on again.
Great, yeah, it's like loading up the computer again. Anyway, it's like 3 different states, and I'm just kind of obsessed with how empty we are and how creepy it can be. If any of you have ever been out on the eastern Montana plains after dark in November, it's a pretty intense experience, and I wanted to capture that. So it's a thing I don't see a lot of. Power of the Dog. Yeah, Power of the Dog. We watched it, and then I read the book, and I had never heard of the book, I'd never heard of the author, and it's from the 60s, and it covers queer themes and queer ideas, and it is Montana Gothic. It is a giant, scary house, and it is a brooding guy, and it is really intense. Yeah, have you read this?
No, but I want to.
You gotta read it. Yeah. Montana Gothic. I'm telling you, this is my jam. This is what I write. So, sorry, I want to just go back and address the idea of what we write and place-based, and how I don't see a lot of queer Montana Gothic, and it is out there.
We have a little bit of time left, and I know we talked about wanting to leave some time for questions, so I guess if the last thing we can touch on before that is what's next for us, if we're writing anything, if we're working on anything, works in progress. And then we can open it up to questions. And then after, if you want to buy your books, they're all over there.
I'm giving mine away, by the way. My book is not out for another month, and we weren't able to get advanced reader copies. So I have 5 plays published from a company called Theater
First come,
Folk.
first serve.
Yeah, it is. I've got The Wizard of Oz, Dracula, Frankenstein, Gorgon Sisters, which is about Medusa's sisters, and then my newest one, which is Finding Jo March, which is a queer version of Little Women. I have a couple of those. I'm the theater teacher at Hellgate High School, by the way, so I test run all my plays there and then publish them. So yeah, I've got a stack of them. They're pretty colors, so make a line at the end if you want one, and I'll give it to you for free.
So what's next for you?
I don't know. I have so many things I'm working on. I want to see how Black Forest does. I've got a book called Summer of the Wolf that is about a town very much like Missoula that might be called Garden City. If you're from here, please don't laugh at me. I wrote it when I was in Illinois and very homesick for Montana. And a lot of gay bashing was happening here. I moved away 2005 and all this horrible stuff was happening. And I love Missoula. I love this place. I keep coming back and back and back to it. And I was ashamed and angry. And I wrote this novel about a terrible dark force and homophobia. And so I'm going to try to get that into some kind of shape and see if somebody wants it.
They will. They'll definitely want it.
So.
Yeah, we want it. Do it for us. Yeah, okay. I have to make one little note because I am an editor, and I totally know that people are like, editors are so mean. But if you're a writer, you have to fall out of love with your work. And I think once you fall out of love with it, then you're going to see the things that need to be worked, the foundations need to be built. So if you are a writer, don't fear, don't you worry. Okay, so what am I doing next? I am writing the third and final book in my Celestial Scripts novels. Those are high fantasy, fun, exciting novels full of magic. I'm working on that, and then I'm currently working on another. I told myself that I was going to try to self-publish romance. I was like, this is hot. I'm going to do it. And then I was kind of writing, and I was like, oh no, there's magic that suddenly showed up. No, it'll just be a chapter, Gwen. It'll just be a chapter. And then it was like, but what if? Let's make a hierarchy of magicians. So that happened. Yes, and that's going to be probably kind of in the same like dark fantasy horror aspect. It's about a city that's built upon the old bones of dead gods. And there are magicians involved who use this bone magic, but there's different types of them. It was going to be queer romance, and now we're back here. It's kind of like Gideon the Ninth, but different. So that's what I've got going on now.
I have two different projects. My writing in terms of genre is all over the place. They're always gay is the theme. But so I'm querying two things now and hopefully hearing back from publishers next week. But the first one is YA about a non-binary teen who moves across the country after her parents divorced to live with her half-brother who, surprise, is deeply closeted. And the other one is, about intergenerational trauma because I'm fun, which is also, very queer, but and has a lot of Jews. So, like, if anyone else is Jewish and interested, that's that's coming out eventually. Gay Jews. Look, you gotta represent yourself. But we can open it up to questions.
Questions. I know you have them. Grandma. Yes.
Well, horror stories are great fun. Dystopian novels are great fun. It's always wonderful to have that escape. And the three of you are such delightful people. And it astonishes me that you can come up with these types of horror stories. It's true literature. Not that it's important, but is it important to build your characters so you love or hate them? Is it important to have a moral to the story in horror?
You have the mic. Oh, I do. I think what I've learned from my reading is that I love characters. I like plot, story, find great scary moments, but you want to like the characters or you want to hate the characters. You want to be invested, let's say. You want to be invested in the characters, and you want to believe that what is happening to them could actually happen. I think that's really important.
For me, yes, character is king. I can totally pick up some trash romance, and if I can jive with the character, then I'm like, oh, I'll buy the series, all right. But as when I'm writing and creating, I have a terrible love of deeply flawed characters, like just those bad boys, who are like really good, but then they like are bad witches or something terrible like that.
We talked about this in our coffee
we
before.
We did. Oh, okay, I didn't kill it. So when I create them, usually I like to give them. There has to be something wrong, with them. They have to, they might be able to draw like Picasso, or they might be able to sing like Madonna, but at the same time, maybe they drive terribly or something. I have no idea. They have to have some kind of flaw that will totally impact their world and throw everything into chaos. So when I create my characters, I always kind of look for that flaw, like what's going to be wrong with them, like because we all have it and we just hide it quite well.
I think for me, in terms of, I don't think it's necessarily as important for me to have a moral as it is to reflect my own ethics. So I write what matters to me, and then in terms of character, I definitely agree that even if you're rooting for someone, or even if you're looking for someone to fail, that you want your good guys to have flaws and you want your bad guys to have redeeming qualities. And even if it's that the choice they make is difficult and there's no right answer, and the choice they make hurts people, or if it is they sing really badly and off key, I think that's important as well.
But it's super funny because I think even though when you're creating a character, I think a lot of people interpret these characters differently. Mom, I had this one character and I was like, he's amazing. I like him a lot. And she's like, he's just a big bully. I hate him. So you never know what's going to happen or what other people are going to see in your characters, which I think is super cool. They all reflect different aspects of who you are and your experiences as a person.
Oh, it is? Okay, cool. So I'm a film student, and I know in class we always talk about when you're pitching something to a producer, like a script or something, and it's a genre, like you have to be very clear in that genre's rules and conventions, so which can sometimes be a little frustrating. So I wanted to ask you guys, when you're approaching a publisher or something like that, how do you draw that line between sticking to the conventions so they recognize that it's a sellable genre, but also bending the rules a bit? How do you find that balance?
We didn't get a moderator, so I'm just gonna walk the microphone to whoever has questions. I'm doing great. But yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And when you are querying, a lot of them, like I was saying before, ask for certain genres, are requesting certain genres, and I think that it's hard, but there are definitely more places now that accept this is a hybrid genre, or this is, this is X with elements of Y. So I think you can look for publishers like that, or else really struggle in the querying trenches. But I think there's more space for that now.
I would always suggest doing like what she said, like coming out of the gate. Don't highlight the differences. Highlight what it's like. That's in popular media. Like, this is Game of Thrones crossed with Alien Covenant. What the hell is that about? I know both those, and I want to know what that is. So I would really come out of the gate being like, this is this. There's two weird genres. They're both popular. People are going to know immediately what Alien is. They know exactly what Game of Thrones is, and then that'll get your people's attention. So really highlight what it's like, and then you can slide in and be like, oh, but by the way, there's like time travel, but that's fine, no big deal. Because I think especially in the film and in publishing, sometimes you see so much, and you really want to stand out, and people can they get brain fog when they're reading through so many queries that but there's an extra piece here and there's an extra piece there, is just going to be like, ugh, it's too much work. But if you say, this is Stargate crossed with Alien, then people are going to be like, oh, okay, tell me more. And then you've got their attention.
And that's the challenge, I think, when I was starting to work with InkShares, which is more like crowdfunding. That's what they wanted, was this meets this. It was a formula they wanted you to use. And I forget what I said for Black Forest. It was like Shirley Jackson meets something gay. I don't know. Gayer than Shirley Jackson. Call me by your name. I don't know how accurate that really was.
And I don't think it needs to be accurate.
I know it doesn't.
As long as you get that attention, you got the foot in the room.
Yeah, you open the door.
What's mine? That's a good question. I can't even remember. It was Dark Tower. It was Stephen King's Dark Tower crossed with a little bit of Mad Max.
Which part of me hates, to be perfectly honest.
Rude.
I can't. No, not that. No, I mean having to. No, not that. That sounds great. I obviously I bought your book. No, I hate having to do the formula thing. I hate having to meets. It just seems. I don't know, but I think you're right. Get the door open, and then once the door is open, you can it open even more. That's totally a word. I am a writer. I don't know. I feel when it comes to genre, mine is pretty. I stick really pretty clearly into horror, and horror has its really clear expectations. Like this is a ghost story, this is a vampire story, this is a werewolf story, and it's you maybe have to be a little bit more creative when they say. We accept this, no more vampire stories, no more witch stories. And then you get creative. You're like, well, he's not really a vampire. He's all these things at once. And then, so whatever makes a person go, oh.
Slipstream, that's your genre. You're a slipstream.
When you're querying, also they ask, you can put in it is like this with elements of X, or it is like this in terms of tone with this kind of subject matter. So you can play with that a bit. But do you have a question?
I do. I was listening to a podcast and they said something about stay in your lane as far as race and, like as a straight white woman, I think the last thing you want me to do is write about only white characters, only straight characters. So just thoughts on.
Oh yeah, I've been. I used to have a podcast with my friend Kaya, where we would talk about these things, and talk about race and gender, particularly sexual orientation, and that came up. Like, am I as a gay cis? What are my qualifications? Gay cis white Montana male. Do I get to write about Black women? And at the same time, if I'm only allowed to write about white gay Montana men, I mean, I guess I could tell that story again and again and again and again, and I have in some instances. But it's a question with no clear answer is the thing. I would always say, consult, ask your friends, find ways to pose questions that are not offensive and stupid sounding, and yeah. Oh no, absolutely. No. It's the real world, and it is. It's hard right now. It's hard. That's all I can really say is it's hard. There's not a really easy answer. Yeah.
Oh, is that okay? Okay, sorry. Because I feel you. Because I am also like. Sharks of the Wasteland has two gay characters in it, male gay characters. Am I male? No, unfortunately. But oh snap. Okay. I think people should be able to write. I think exploration is very important. I think there is kind of a snake eating its own tail in some respects. Like people say, don't write that. But I think it's because there's been so much mismanagement and disrespect. And so I think if you have a character that maybe whatever it may be, he may be, she may be, they may be. I think there's so much out there, and people are so willing to talk. And also, there's tons of resources. Like there's a great Tumblr called "People of Color," writing with people of color, and it's fantastic. It talks about skin tone and everything like that, and how to avoid things that you might inadvertently think are that you wouldn't even know, hidden inherent racism or whatever, it's there. And I had a sensitivity reader for Sharks of the Wasteland because there's a Native character in it, and she was fantastic. And she actually pointed out a couple of things that were wonderful. And she was like, "Okay, you're using this like it was a reference to like a moccasin." And she was like, "I get what you're doing here." And she's like, "I respect it, but I want you to know that this brings up this type of historical event, like the Trail of Tears." She's like, "And I would have never have known that because I'm not Native. I don't know." And when she said that, I was like, it opened my world. I was like, now I see a lot more things that I might not have seen earlier. And I think if you go back and watch a lot of old TV shows, you can see a lot of awful things in the way people are portrayed. And if you can say, okay, you could recognize that, apply it to your own fiction, and fixing it, like making sure you don't perpetuate those kind of stereotypes. I think that's really important. But I think people are like staying in their lane because there's been so much mismanagement and so much fighting of people saying, well, I can write whatever I want. It's fiction. And it's like, okay, yes, sure. But exactly, like you can do it in a way that you can do it in a way that doesn't perpetuate things that are, that have been there and you don't want in your fiction anymore. Okay, sorry, I talked a lot. You go.
I think that for me, I have no real right to an opinion about people of color as a white author. I will say that I've been listening to a lot of folks on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram who are talking about how when they see white authors portray characters of color, all they really want is for that sensitivity, for that. To not use stereotypes, to not describe skin color as food, because what is that? That's all everywhere. And I think that so some of the things that we can do is listen to folks with marginalized identities, be respectful, have sensitivity readers, folks who are of those marginalized identities that we're representing in our books, read it to read for accuracy, and then I think those are the main things. But a lot of folks now, this is a very important discussion that we're currently having, and I think writers of color have been having it for a long time, and white people are just starting to listen. But I think that it's just about listening and about trying to portray things in a respectful way. And if you make a mistake, to apologize, and like an actual apology, not like, I'm sorry if I hurt you, but like a real, and make an effort to change.
And one thing that has always been important that I've learned about this one gal, she's a writer, Rihanna Held. She did this Tarnished series. It was published by Tor, and she is an archaeologist. And she always said, think about power and history. Where is the power and where is the history? And that has been monumental in how I approach my fiction sometimes. Because I'll think, where is the power in my magic hierarchy? And how does that relate historically to what's been happening? Am I perpetuating awful things that have happened, or am I going against them in some way? And that's kind of helped me in a quick way to say, come back and be like, look this up, check this out again, make sure this is appropriate.
I think in terms of queerness, in terms of other marginalized identities that I do identify with, I love it when I see myself represented even by authors who aren't part of those marginalized identities, but when the representation is bad, it's really bad. Like I read a book recently that had the gay best friend trope, and I was just like, haven't we moved past that? So I think we're yeah. There are a lot of people who just don't care. But on that happy note,
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I think we have time for one more.
15 seconds.
First, I have to say, I'm a nature writer, and I don't read horror, and I'm loving this panel. It's great. And what has kind of drawn me toward the genre a little more is the climate crisis and some of the dystopic fiction around that. And and to me, it's helping. It is drawing me that direction, because maybe we're all looking for some escape, some solution, some way. And I just wondered if any of that. Do you think that's true, that that's happening, and does that enter into any of your writing?
Oh, I can talk about this for.
We can answer real quick.
Okay, this is like a big topic in all of my fiction, like climate. Environmental horror is a big in both this one and especially in Sharks of the Wasteland. Sharks of the Wasteland pretty much had the Yellowstone volcano explode and how that affected the whole United States, and also the ramifications of how people have dealt with it. And then also in this one, we have an environmental crisis. There's a big cavern, the Dark and Bloody, that opened up in the middle of the United States that was caused by fracking, and of course it inspired some environmental magical people to emerge. But at the same time, how those kind of things can change our world. And then hell itself, I've kind of approached as what if it's its own ecosystem with its own people and its own type of animals and biosphere and everything, and yet the human souls that are coming into it are actually like the intruders in some way, and they're colonizing hell. And so I think environmentalism is huge at least in my writing and the things that I want to perpetuate. And then also, I think it's becoming real. Those science fiction books that were written in the 80s and 90s are our lives now. So I think it's very important.
I'll say I started querying at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I reached out to a lot of folks who got back to me and were like, no one wants to read dystopia right now. But I think there's always a space for that, especially when there is some semblance of hope. I think people, especially right now, really want to see that there could be a way out, even if it's fantastical. So, okay, we'll be here if y'all want to buy our books or get some free plays. The books are out there, but we'll be sticking around. So, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.